All right, so now that 3/5 of our exec board has managed to turn on the camera, I'd like to thank you all for taking a study break and coming out to talk about this really important event. This is our union strike conflict panel. If you guys could just take a moment to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your position on this and why it's important to students and faculty.
I'm Stangl. I teach the political science department. I'm our department rep on the Representative Council on campus. I'm also a statewide delegate for Westchester as far as the state system, statewide meetings go.
I'm Seth Kahn. I teach in the English department. I am the ABSCUF. My big formal position is I'm the grievance chair or the contract enforcement officer. So people come to me when they think that the contract has been violated somehow to get help with trying to resolve situations. I also serve on our statewide legislative assembly with Chris and do a whole bunch of other stuff.
Hi, I'm Sudol from the Department of Physics. I am the ABSCUF representative for the Department of Physics, and that's about it. I'm relatively new to the union business. I've been serving as the representative for 6 months now. But I believe in power with people.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
You want me to open it up?
I don't know.
Alright, can I get like the basic structure of, like my father's part of a postal clerks union. I just want to know if it's any way similar because that's a government union. Like how does yours function? Like who's in charge for like at least Westchester, the hierarchical structure overall?
Okay, so probably easier actually to start at the very top. So all the faculty of all 14 state PASSHE campuses are part of the same union. Sorry. So each campus is a chapter. Okay. So at the top we have an executive council. We have the president, Steve Hicks, who sent you that email that you were confused about why you got it. A vice president, people with officer kinds of titles, and then the kind of policy-making body of the organization is the legislative assembly. So we meet quarterly. Each campus has a delegation that's proportional to its size. That's what Chris and I were talking about that we serve on at the state level. So we go to these meetings quarterly, and we make policy for the organization, right? Each campus then has essentially a parallel kind of structure. So we have an executive board with the officers and some at-large exec council people, and then we have our representative council, which I guess you're, well, I guess because you're, so Jeff from the physics department is a delegate to our, our local policy-making body. And then there are a variety of other committees that do sort of like a bunch of different kinds of work. So Chris is the chair of the local legislative committee and tracks, track stuff that's happening in Harrisburg. I chair the grievance committee. We have a gender issues and social justice committee and a membership committee, yada, yada, yada.
One thing I'd add too, just because there seemed to be some confusion when the whole strike authorization vote was going down about a month ago, that some policy is made at the Legislative Assembly when we meet, but something like the strike authorization vote, there's a multi-step process, and I think some people thought that we were voting to go on strike or not go on strike, and that wasn't the case. We as a Legislative Assembly had a meeting late October, I think it was?
September.
It's September.
Oh, no, that's right. You guys had a special one.
Oh, right, the
That's
special
right, in October.
So the Legislative Assembly statewide group meets to open up the vote, to make a recommendation to the rank and file on all 14 campuses. But the vote that was just held on all 14 campuses was whether or not to authorize, and everybody gets a vote there. I mean, it's solidarity through and through. Every member of the rank and file gets to cast a vote as to whether or not to permit the union leadership to go forward and go on strike if they see fit. That's all what happened. So the authorization's been given. So a strike could be called, but that's all that was permission. But that has to happen. It has to be a vote by the membership. I mean, there's no junta looking to take over here or anything. So it's a multi-step process. It's a bit bureaucratic, but for good reason. You want some redundancy in these processes. So.
Right, and it's designed to be deliberative and deliberate, right, actually, I guess it's probably a better version of the word there. Things happen slowly because we need time to make sure that that's what ought to happen. Do you know what I mean? A strike is a very serious action, and it's not something to be done lightly. Or every once in a while, you see a union that sort of is filled with a bunch of really agitated people who are kind of hell bent on going on strike because they like doing protests and they like being on the picket line and they like rabble rousing. And in certain contexts, that might be appropriate. This is not one of them. Not with 6,000 of us and 120,000 of you, and all the people who work on campus and depend on the place being open for their jobs.
Yeah, basically what I got from that whole process was even if that gets like information to show now, wait, we're not calling this strike, we just want to tell everyone, we're serious about this and we're not going to just jump on the students or parents or the whole community that, look, we're going on strike. It's like we're authorizing it and going through this process, and it also has the effect, like, oh, here's more time, like just, we don't want this to happen, but we're going to put it in motion if it has to be, so.
Yeah, and there's certainly it's the process we have to follow, but it has the added benefit of communicating to the folks who are interested.
Also, is your union an open or closed shop, just for the basics?
By that you mean?
Does a professor who's part of the staff here have to join the union?
Everybody, those are terms that are really floated in some ways. So everybody, you can opt not to join the union.
Okay.
But everybody who's a faculty member, everybody who does any bargaining unit work in the state has to, even if you don't join the union, you pay what's called fair share, because you're still entitled to union representation even if you're not a member. So somebody who's a non-member but fair share payer could still come to me to file a grievance, for example, and expect grievance representation.
From the union?
From the union.
Okay, because that's a big difference, because I hate to really impact my father's union, but I can't remember what exactly, there's different postal unions, obviously, he works for the post office. And his union, while it doesn't force people to join the union, it's optional. Other people do not pay any sort of dues or any kind of fair share into the union, although they have to provide them with the benefits of like health care or whatever thing they fight for and representation.
Yeah. So even without fair share.
I don't know how they also went through collecting the bargaining agreement, which is they just got theirs done and they kind of lost a little bit on it. So I mean, I don't know the exact details now, so I couldn't tell you what exactly has been going on, but I just find that interesting. Getting down to the nitty gritty though, like what is this strike all about? Because many people just think, assume, oh, they want more money, oh, they want more.
Well, I'll give you my synopsis. My synopsis is that we want to preserve the structure of the university system as it is today. This on our side is an act of preservation. We just want to preserve the contract we have and the system that we have in place today. The Pennsylvania state system of higher education has put forth a large number of proposals that would dramatically change the structure of the university system. We can run through a few of those if you like. I'll start with...
Remind everyone, how long have you been without a contract?
We've been without a contract
June 30th, 2011.
Yeah. So
And have negotiations been going on consistently throughout that time, or?
Intermittently, maybe.
intermittently, but negotiations started before our previous contract expired.
Okay.
And so negotiations have been in progress for close to 2 years now. I think we're at the 17, no,
Something like that.
18 months.
A long time.
Long. Yeah, we're 15, 16, 17, no, we're 18 months without a contract, almost.
Yeah, so we're more like 22, 23 months
Yeah,
since they
close to
started
22,
actually talking.
we were 23 months of negotiation.
But what were some of the factors you were talking about, that the self-preservation, what
Well-
exactly is changing?
I wouldn't say self-preservation, I would say we want to preserve the structure that
Yeah.
we've built up over the course of the last 50 years as a union. For example, one of the generic proposals, there are some things we can talk about and some things we cannot talk about, but one of the proposals from the Chancellor few years ago, was to create a new class of teacher called a lecturer. And lecturers would be responsible for teaching 30 credits per year as opposed to 24. Full-time faculty teach 24 credits per year. So the workload would go up for this lecturer class of employee, and lecturers would be paid substantially less. There was a bid to, well, I should say, the Chancellor had put forth the idea of increasing the regular full-time faculty load to 27 credits.
With no increase in pay.
With no increase.
So do more work, but get paid the same.
Okay. Temporary faculty were going to take significant cuts in pay. Other things.
So one of the proposals that came from the Chancellor's office, and as far as I know, this is still on the table. So the credit load, the 24 credits that we teach as full time, is fall and spring semester, and we can teach summers and get paid a little bit extra, right? And now the winter session right now, that's extra pay. That's like off our regular contract, right? We're above our normal load. The Chancellor's office, as part of that increase to 27 credits, and not even associated with the increase, they basically want to be able to make winter session and summer session teaching at the discretion of the local administration, right? So that the Chancellor, so that the provost or my dean, the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, could say, teach 3 classes, fall and spring, and then 2 during the summer. And it's no longer voluntary. Like, she could direct me to reorganize my workload however she wanted to, so that the academic year became essentially a meaningless concept. Do you know what I mean? And the way we divvy up our work lives, anybody who tells you we don't work summers really needs, I can't end that sentence. It's a really wrong, it's incorrect. Right? We work actually quite hard during the summer, doing things that we can't do while we're teaching 4 classes at a time, and all the other things we do during the regular school year, like working on our research and our scholarship and writing and stuff that needs dedicated time.
Yeah, the kind of time where we really need to sit down for several hours per day, every day for weeks on end to finish a project. The kind of work we cannot do during the semester because we are so heavily involved in teaching.
Right. And the kind of work that I couldn't do even if I'm teaching one summer class, because if I've got to be on campus for 2 hours and 15 minutes, 4 days a week, that's going to happen right in the middle of my work. That's going to happen right in the middle of the day, and there's not going to be enough time left before or after it to sustain the kind of attention that I need to. That's what we do with our summers. We write, most of us, or do research or what have you. And to have at the discretion of somebody with a spreadsheet and no other interest, kind of moving us around on it wherever they want us because they want to have certain sections of classes offered. You can understand why we might buck against that, I hope. We'd like to be able to make some decisions about how we divvy up our lives as long as we're actually doing the allocated work.
Yeah, there was also a push to give more administrative control over our teaching duties, in particular with regard to distance education. So instead of our chairs, the chairs of our departments being responsible for directing our work, then the deans would be responsible. So the deans could, for example, direct us to teach a distance ed course, whether or not we wanted to teach a distance ed course. I have very strong opinions about distance ed courses. One of them being, it's been done. There are entire institutions dedicated to distance education courses. There is a small population of people for whom the need exists, for whom it's appropriate, but it's a technology boat that sailed. And what we really should be thinking about if we want to be a progressive institution is leapfrogging and going to a different place than sort of classic distance education. But that structure where the deans could assign faculty to distance ed courses interrupts with what we call the academic year model. In the academic year model, departments act kind of like independent little entities, and it's their responsibility as a department to come up with a positive balance, so to speak, on the record sheet. That is, each department has to teach a specific number of students to be positive on the balance sheet. That is, to earn as much income as it costs to run the department. And if the deans or other administrators had control over directing who would teach which courses, that takes our ability to meet our quota to balance the budget away from us. So we can't function under the academic year model anymore. Any administrator could come in and tinker with the department in such a way as to make the department's budget go negative and destroy a department without us having control over that. So there's a conflict between that policy and the local academic year model. So there are huge problems.
And it takes away curricular control, right? If they can mandate distance education classes and they can mandate who teaches them and when, right? I mean, what Jeff said before, that what we're trying to protect is a system, right? Part of what that means, and I'll risk saying at the risk of sounding selfish, I suppose, I think most of us on the faculty believe that we know more about teaching and working conditions and learning conditions than people who haven't done it in a very long time, if ever, right? And that we ought to have more to say about the conditions under which education happens than some of the people who are trying to take those decisions away from us, right? And that just, I'm sorry, that just doesn't strike me as unreasonable.
So there's been a lot of discussion about shift in the academic year and towards something else. Is there any reason why the administration might be pushing for such a thing?
I'm talking to you.
I can speculate.
I think some of this needs to be viewed just in context of other labor actions, other stories that have put labor in the news the last couple of years. I think there's an element just of pure control here. It dovetails off what Seth said. I honestly believe that some of the friction that we've 2007, we didn't have a contract for what, 36 hours? I mean, it got settled July 2nd. I mean, we didn't go out on July 1st, So there have been multiple occasions with previous contracts where things went past, the drop dead date and got settled without feelings being hurt too much, without relations being soured. And I'm not sure if there's any one single thing that's substantially different this time around, but the entire culture is. And some of it, honestly, from where I sit, feels like the state wants this to be this way now just because they think they can make it that way. Honestly, some of what you get updated on, not you, us, updated on negotiations-wise, it's hard to divine a rational connection between what their objective is and how they're going to fulfill it with this proposal, other than just, we get to make the call, so we're going to make the call. I don't know if the academic year aspect fits that. There are arguments made. We'd have to have a bigger conversation about what the chancellor thinks about the state system of higher education as a whole. There's a lot of moving parts there, but some of it just comes down to, I think, a desire to impose one's will on us and consequences be damned. I gotta be honest, that's our focus.
I would speculate from a couple years of evidence. If I put that together and come up with some theories, some speculation, I would say they're trying to reduce the cost of operating the university system. That is so you have to understand, John Kavanaugh came in after the recession. Oh, we didn't?
2008.
2008. Well, that's when the recession was.
Well, sort of.
Yeah.
but he was well. Okay, I know history about Kavanaugh. That's not.
He was at a previous university.
One of my best friends taught at the university where he worked before he got hired here. So, I don't want to get into that one. Actually, that's one I don't like.
But so my speculation is that John Kavanaugh was brought in by the Board of Governors with a specific purpose, and that purpose was to make this the least expensive, basically raise revenue, decrease costs.
Yep.
Classic business model, right? How do we raise revenue? How do we decrease costs? And every proposal that I've seen coming from Kavanaugh's office is about that. It raises revenue, it reduces costs.
And the sort of alternate schedules, right? The getting rid of conventional consent semesters is in the eyes of the Chancellor's office is a revenue raising move. They believe that they can generate more credits faster, and that there's a sort of untapped population of students out there that we could be recruiting if we would offer those kinds of courses. And that it wouldn't take any more work, right? So of course, from our point of view, it would take a great deal more work that we don't get to say very much about this, about like designing or deciding whether we actually need to do it. We have some problems with that. But that's the, like, from his point of view, that's the theory, right? Is that there, like, that there are credits to be had and students to be had if we're willing to be flexible in a way that we're not currently.
And one of the ideas that comes out of the calendar, if you look at how the calendar has evolved over the last few years, the calendar's been pushed really tight, so there's hardly ever a day when the campus is not operating. Because if the campus is not operating, you know, you're paying to heat buildings when no one's in them. You're paying for electricity when no one's around. You're paying, you know, so to maximize the utility of the space, you teach all the time. But I think that's misguided because I think people don't understand how intense teaching is. I think as students you understand how intense the learning process is. So it's, you know, the current design is a design that's very intense, and you just can't keep that up all year. Breaks are essential, at least certainly from the faculty perspective. You need breaks.
There's a hand that's been raised back there for a while, so.
I wanted to know, I did come late, so I don't know if you answered this already, but I wanted to know what is stopping the Chancellor from renewing the contract? Is it all these factors, you know, whether it be the money or, I want to ask, is it the lack of action from the students? Because I have this letter from my history professor today who is basically asking students to write letters to the Chancellor to appeal to the Chancellor and say, oh, you know, like, this isn't fair. So is it more of a, are the contracts not getting renewed because there isn't a lot of empathy from students, basically?
No, I mean, not in the sense that anybody should feel guilty or as if that's been a key failure. I wouldn't want to speculate as to the quantity of student activity that would be required to
So
change
what's
the
the
Chancellor's mind.
necessity of this then?
It can, right, it can have an effect marginally, right? It can have an effect in making clear that it's something that people care about. You know, I don't want to sell students short in saying that nothing you can do is going to change this, but I also don't want to make it sound like, I don't want it to sound like a guilt trip either. I mean.
Oh, I'm not taking it as a guilt trip.
Yeah.
I'm taking it as more of a.
Obviously, we think that our interests and your interests are completely coinciding here.
Exactly.
Venn diagram, right?
Yes.
Absolutely. So anything you want to do, including spreading the word to other students, please, yes. You know, we love this, but maybe I just heard what you said wrong, but, and maybe I thought you were attributing words to the Chancellor that but it's, if the Chancellor were to say, oh, this would have been settled if students would have shown more energy or more support, I think that's a bad faith argument on his part.
So the reason why it has been renewed is because you guys don't want the union to be splintered? Is that because, I don't understand.
Well,
I don't know that I would, the reason that it hasn't been settled, I would say, is that there hasn't been, I would certainly agree that the Chancellor has not been motivated enough to settle, right? And there are any number of factors involved there. Some of which, you know, and the bottom line kind of financial argument, every year that we don't get the incremental pay raise that we would ordinarily get, every year that our health insurance coverage doesn't get any more expensive for them, is like, that's money that they save. Do you know what I mean? So as long as we work under the terms of our old contract, they're saving money and they're perfectly content with that, right? Plus, there's been, and there's a sort of long history here that we don't need to recount in particular detail, but you know, our union has never struck. And there's certainly been a kind of chicken game that this Chancellor, more than the last one, seems just interested in playing because that's kind of his personality. He's a man's man. You know, he's a let's go like bet thousands of dollars on the golf course kind of guy. Do you know what I mean? And he is, and I think that's part of the game here. Is he's interested in seeing how far he can push us, right? parallel with that, or simultaneous with that, is it's really important to us, and I think this is sort of my version of what I think you were getting at, it's really important to us that you don't feel like you're being enlisted to fight for us by writing letters to the Chancellor, because that's not the deal, right? We have, we're capable of fighting for ourselves, and we don't need an army of students who we're enlisting and bully pulpiting into getting you to be our minions. I mean, for heaven's sakes, we spend our careers teaching you not to be that person. Why on earth would we then ask you to do it? Right?
Yes.
At the same time, and this is the sort of delegate disco here, right? At the same time, every time the Chancellor knows that one of the 130,000 something people that's involved in actually doing what our system does every day is getting irritated with him because of their intransigence, that's a good thing. Every time he knows that somebody else is getting more and more agitated, that they're not doing what they ought to be doing, that's a good thing. He needs to know that.
If I may.
Please.
With regard to why haven't we settled on a new contract, basically the union is here saying we would pretty much like the same contract we've had. We're willing to tinker around with it. We're willing to try to find some cost savings here and there, but basically we like the contract we had. The Chancellor's over here. I'm trying to go off camera. Over way out in extreme space.
Stretch Armstrong couldn't reach far enough to.
When you go into a negotiation on a contract, it's very typical that people will play to some extremes. Okay? I've never seen an extreme so extreme as the Chancellor's extreme. It's out there. So far out that the things that have been put on the table in our contract are simply unacceptable. We will not accept that. For example, retirees get no benefits. Just gone. The retiree benefits are gone. No, we won't accept that because we don't want to do that to the retirees, and we wouldn't want that for ourselves. So that's part of it. Now, as far as action goes, I would say a few things. We've taken several steps to demonstrate our, to establish our position and demonstrate our frustration with the process with the governor's office, the Pennsylvania state legislation, with the Chancellor's office happening. I kind of liken this to the parents are having an argument and don't really want the kids to get involved. Okay? But there will come a point when we will need everyone who's interested in preserving our system to get involved. And so we're getting close to that time where we need you guys as well to voice your opinions, to tell the Chancellor that, hey, it's time to settle this contract, that we would like to continue with our education and stay in school. And what was I going to say?
I don't know.
I don't know. Where was I
Let's
going?
skip the line where you're going.
I was going somewhere with this as far as your involvement. Oh, right. The other thing is, I wouldn't just pester the Chancellor about this. I wouldn't just write to the Chancellor. I'd write to your state legislators. I'd write to the governor. I'd write to the Chancellor's bosses.
You can call them too. You can call their offices.
Write to the Board of Governors. Write to the governor for the corporate. Write to everyone who has, who in a sense is the Chancellor's boss. Because, this works in the world. Like, if you go over there, if your boss starts getting word that one of the employees is irritating customers, so to speak, and we don't want to use the customer model per se, but the bosses don't like having to deal with that. They go to the Chancellor and say, look, Chancellor, this is your problem. Why haven't you dealt with it? So by irritating the bosses, you can get some action from the Chancellor right there. I may be wrong there. You're the political expert. It happens. Does that work?
That's not, it depends on the people you're dealing with.
Personally, I don't think the Chancellor would ever. I don't think the Chancellor will settle until he gets sufficient pressure from all sides, and that's important. That the student pressure isn't the only pressure that's going to be important. It's one of many pressure points, but it's still a pressure point that we'll need.
I would proportion that a little differently. I think the pressure that comes from students is immense because there are 120,000 of you, and you guys write and either you write and sign the checks, or somebody writes and sign the checks on your behalf. Do you know what I mean, right? And that matters. And there are a lot of you. Think about that. That's 120,000 people. That's a lot of people. Not at Westchester, obviously, right? But across the system. There are a lot of students. You guys are loud when you want to be.
Well, what I mean is that it's sort of the pressure point we bring in last to sort of
well,
the picture.
Yeah, I think in some ways that's true.
Well, relating to Seth's point a little bit, 120,000 is a big number, and it's my understanding that that's growing here, especially, and throughout the rest of the state system. If the intention is to create more revenue, are those tuition dollars not creating enough revenue? Is that what's going on with that balance? Because I think most of us have seen some, issue of like we have not, our population has risen so drastically, so quickly that, we're waiting in lines for food service, we're, running out of space in dorms, we're moving, classes into inappropriate, venues and having extraordinary class sizes for things that really should be fairly small.
And on our side, we've accepted more work. More students is more work. There's no question of that. And we've accepted more work. We've accepted larger class sizes without increase in pay. So we said for the last few years, we said, okay, we're willing to accommodate the shortfall in state budget because of the recession by doing that. I think I don't know the numbers for sure. I know the last report I read, something like half of the shortfall. Okay, so we sort of have an annual budget, and there's a shortfall in the annual budget, and we were able to make up half of that with tuition dollars, and the other half with deficiencies. So reductions in costs here and there. So cost reductions and deficiencies. But that's just local. That's Westchester University. I don't have numbers.
Okay.
I follow a lot of the stuff with K-12 education, and I know that the two main components of that right now is, in Pennsylvania at least, is the budget cuts, and then there's the child left behind part of it. So I guess what I'm wondering is, are all these issues purely budgetary, or is it because they're, like, are they trying to control the, like, is it, like, because they don't think you're doing a good job, or, like, in terms of teaching, or, like, are they trying to monitor it?
Here's the very same kind of logic. If I could speak that in italics, that's what I want you to be hearing right now, right? The very same kind of logic that drives that educational reform movement that's kind of, like circulates around No Child Left Alive, right? The kind of everything has to be as efficient as possible, and quality emerges from the kind of competition among the moving parts of the system. If we just get rid of the people who suck, then the stars could shine brighter, and like all those sorts of claims, that educational reform rhetoric, right? John Kavanaugh wants to be the person who brings that logic to public higher education. He wants to be the Arnie Duncan, right? He wants to be the Michelle Ray. He wants to be the names that are sort of the kind of iconic names of that education reform movement, right? He wants to be that guy for public higher education, right?
Has he said stuff about like that?
Oh, he's been writing about this stuff since for 15 years. So the things I think I can say on camera about what he did at the University of West Florida before he got hired to come here, which I know about because my friend who worked there confronted a great deal of this stuff, and she left at the same time he did, right? Because she didn't realize he was leaving. She was like, I gotta get the hell away from this guy, right? So he fired because they didn't have a union. Well, they had a union, but Florida's a right to work for less state, so they weren't allowed to strike. It was basically a toothless kind of bargaining agent. he fired 30% of the tenure track faculty and replaced them with part-time adjunct faculty, temporary adjunct faculty, who have zero job security of any kind. It's part of the definition of being an adjunct faculty member, is that you can be fired at any time without any cause whatsoever if the university, like the university doesn't, like literally no cause. You're done, get out, go away. Do you know what I mean? And so part of the reason that he went that he wanted to jack up the adjunct population there is because they get paid less and it's cheaper. But part of the reason is because since their jobs are contingent and they're entirely at the will of administration, who is going to fight for curricular control? Who is going to fight for any kind of decision-making authority or shared governance, knowing that the second they say something in public, some seat might say, "You out." Do you know what I mean? Right? Like, it's neoliberal logic 101.
To add to that, in education since the 1920s, roughly, since America had a high school system, a public education system, there's always been this pendulum swing between tight government control and teacher autonomy. And we're moving towards the tight government control. And it's a very interesting statistic, at least recently, that your generation of students is the most tested generation of students ever. And you're the worst, statistically speaking. Sorry. I mean, that is, that by...
That's one of the reasons we love you.
You know, I mean, I don't want to say the worst, like you're bad people. No, you're
But it's not effective what they're doing.
right. What that is essentially, when you look at the scores, the more we test you, the lower the scores get. It's this weird correlation. And I forget the detailed fine logic, but essentially, classroom autonomy is good for teachers.
Well, there's, in dollar accounting where I live, they're actually spending 60% of class time either taking a test or preparing for a test. So, you know, like at a certain point, you cross that line where you're not really actually teaching anymore. You're just, you know,
Right.
treating
It's
them.
yeah. I mean, it's not weird logic at all, right? I mean, the more you test, the more you're emphasizing things that can be measured quickly, you know, with some precision. And so, the more the stuff that doesn't gets crowded out. And you know, when I teach presently, I mean, from my point of view, teaching, and I think this is true at the K-12 level as well, it requires some semblance of faith, and I don't mean that in a religious way necessarily, but faith that some of the benefits of your experience in the classroom with this semester's class will be realized later. I mean, if all the benefits could be realized in a one semester time frame, we would need to radically reform how we go about educating people. But it's an obvious faith to have, if you ask me, that not everything that's worth getting out of an education is recognizable in the classroom during that semester. But if that's all you're looking to measure when you have tests, and you spend more and more time prepping for those tests, you're crowding out all those things that you can't measure right away, like critical thinking skills, like being able to put together, an impressive essay. I mean, the list could go on. And so we have this entire sort of management orientation that it's all about the bottom line. And of course the bottom line is important, but if all that counts as the bottom line is that which can be seen now, that which can be measured now, that's an impoverished notion of what we're doing in the first place, I'd say.
Yeah.
And I think you're feeling the same, and yeah, I think it's a twin sort of experience. I think folks that call the shots in K through 12 throughout much of the country are playing from the same playbook. And it really doesn't matter who wrote it, because it's the same playbook and it's the same errors.
And there's a social class element to this too, when you get to the, and I don't know enough about K-12 private education to draw the parallel accurately, but there's a reason that we're having the conversations we're having about curriculum and control and shared governance and finances in the way that all of those relate to each other in a state university system. They ain't having those conversations at Dartmouth. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right? And there's a reason why when you go to the PASSHE website, right, when you look at the state system website, almost everything it pitches you is about job preparation and about teaching you, because their assumption is that because most of you are working class and middle class students, right, that your primary reason for being here is to improve your employability, that you're essentially here for vocational training, if that, right? If anything other than just a piece of paper, you're here for job skills training, right? Because people of your social class, why would you aspire to anything else? You know, let the rich kids go to Harvard and talk about love and God, because they've got time to, you know, they've got time to think about that stuff, right?
Well, that never was the purpose of public education. It used to be that it would lift you, like sort of lift you up, and that sounds kind of corny or
Mobility.
whatever,
Association.
but now they're basically just throwing that aside
Yeah.
and forgetting about it, so.
So I remember now the autonomy argument. So the autonomy argument goes like this. So if you're an expert, the thing you want to do is exercise your expertise. And you know, so the way I think of it is, okay, I've been hired because I have an expertise in physics and I have an expertise in education. And my job then is to exercise that expertise in the classroom. I want a lot of autonomy over that. Well, if the government comes along and says, you have to meet all of these objectives and competencies in your classroom when you're teaching it, when you're teaching this class, because you have to meet these standards. Whether or not I agree with those standards doesn't matter. They've taken my autonomy away.
Right.
They're saying, we hired you to be an expert, but actually we don't believe you're the expert. Here's what an expert would do in your position. It's like, what? Wait a minute.
I mean, one of the people who are actually writing those competencies don't know anything about physics, probably.
Actually, I will admit, when we came to the articulation agreement, the fellow who wrote the objectives and competencies for physics did an okay job. I agree with about 90% of them. So I'm not actually annoyed with the articulation agreement because
Just the
of
fact that they're doing it.
I'm annoyed because they chose to do it.
Yeah.
that they've essentially taken away some autonomy and kind of, you know, hurt my ego, dare I say. It's an ego punch.
Well, and you know, we spend a lot of time, we spend a long time in graduate school learning to do what we do, right? And the authority that comes with getting the title is not just a randomly, like it's not conferred by the piece of paper, right? It's conferred by the work that it took to actually get that degree, right? And that, like, that's what we do. Right? What did we do with all that training? We learned to make the kinds of decisions that are being taken away from us by that kind of external control. All right, Jackson's complaining.
So we've kind of been discussing, I guess indirectly, the quality of education and things like that. And I was looking at some rather interesting statistics recently. The four-year graduation rate for public universities is somewhere in the 20 to 40% range, and the six-year graduation rate doesn't really get higher than 65%. Now, when you look at private universities, on the other hand, so your Dartmouths, your Harvards, et cetera, they are much higher in their graduation rates in both 4-year and 6 years. So how does that kind of play into all of this?
Oh man,
I'm not sure I want that's Pandora's box right there.
no, I mean, I think there are actually a handful of pretty concrete answers to that. I'm just not sure how illuminating they like. It's hard, especially at this time of night for me, because I'm not past my bedtime. I'm a morning person. Right? It's like it'd be hard for me to answer that question without ranting to a certain degree, and because it's something like those kind of educational politics, like educational class politics, is something that I think about a great deal. But the very short version of it is the reason that the graduation rates are higher from the elite private schools is because they can afford to make sure that their students get out. Right? So at Stanford, for example, you can keep taking the class as many times as you want to until you get a grade that you're happy with. Do you know what I mean? Like they make sure, and and part of the reason that you can get more devoted, sustained attention from your PhD faculty members at Dartmouth is because there are only 1,200 students there. You're not fighting for time. Yada yada yada.
And they're only teaching 2 courses.
And they're only teaching 2 courses at a time, or
2
what
a
have
semester
you.
or 2 a year.
Yeah. So it's like the whole structure is so different that the comparison is
It's almost
difficult.
unfair.
It's difficult. Yeah.
So you can read my book about this. I have a book called How to Choose a Good College. And I address related issues early on in the book. If you look at college rankings, the #1 factor that goes into college rankings is how much money does the institution spend to educate each student. So now, and it's very, very tight correlation. Sonoma State spends $90,000 a year per student. Westchester, I think, spends something like 20,000. So, and that's a combination of tuition. So you're paying about 6,000 or 7,000, and then the state's kicking in some money as well. We don't have endowments. Private schools have endowments, and money comes in from endowments and so on. So the different institutions have different structures. And then, as I like to say about MIT kids at MIT, you throw them a book, put them in the closet, 6 months later, give them a test, they'll ace the test, because they're just that kind of students. They're just a different breed, they're off the bell curve, they're way off the bell curve. So, but I don't want to get into too many details.
How many of you guys work at least a part-time job?
Yeah, there's that.
I suspect if you asked, if we were in the same room at Dartmouth and asked that question, the answer, like, if it were possible for the answer to that to be negative, it would be. Right? Especially in Dartmouth, where there's no place to work because there's nothing within 1,000 miles of Dartmouth. But okay, that was a
People
slight
at Dartmouth
exaggeration.
are employing.
Sorry.
People at Dartmouth are employing.
Well, that's kind of true too, but so that's one of the reasons the graduation rates slow down, right? It's almost impossible to maintain a full-time course load and concentrate on it all the time. How many of you guys are going to graduate in 4 years?
I don't know.
Right. So about half of you raised your hands. Several of those half of you were not particularly confident in if your body language was any indication. And there's your percentage differential right there.
So, and it raises the question, is college the new high school? I love that question.
Mm-hmm.
Is college the new high school? And what does that mean? It's a big question. The question is answered in my book. I'm trying to promote my book.
But they've already chosen a good college.
That's true.
Yeah.
So I should say, one of the reasons I came to Westchester is that we can actually get close to replicating the liberal arts environment with small class sizes, and yet still be a large institution. If when I interviewed here they said, "Oh, you're going to teach 350 students," I would have said no in a heartbeat. I would have said, "Not going to work here." So one of the reasons I work here is because my classroom has 20 to 40 students.
Yep. Ditto.
Yeah, and yeah, Westchester does extremely well. I've been to lots of institutions in my past. We do extremely well with what little we have. It's impressive.
Basically, that's what I was thinking. Like, do you think that they're basically making the whole public higher education system, the high school public education system, even though it's clearly not really working, especially in where money goes and everything like that? If anybody here who went to high school in the past, one was the PSSA, like, originally put in, or Terra Novas or stuff like that. I mean, when I was in high school, it was just terrible. I was terrible at all that stuff, and I came here, and it's the college, the way that everyone teaches is just so much easier and everything like that, and we do have a good quality of professors. Now, do you think that has that argument been brought up to anybody in administration thinking, look, you're going to lose quality professors? Because honestly, like, I've had Dr. Stangl, I've had like Dr. Polsky, I've had and just other professors like that who are really good professors. And like, I'm sure you both are too as well. I've never had you. I've heard good things. So, I mean, has that argument been brought up, like that, like you said, if you were teaching 350 students, like, you wouldn't have taken the job. So, I mean,
Well,
it doesn't even faze them. Like,
I will say outright, if for some crazy reason the original contract that PASSHE had offered had gone through, I would have quit. I would leave you instantly. And yet, we've made arguments about how various policies that have been proposed would degrade the quality of education and how it would actually do. We have, like in physics, for example, we have a really hard time getting strong physics faculty. Because in the world of physics, your identity is your publication record, which means you've got to be doing research and competitive research and publishing on a regular basis. And that is extremely hard to do when you're teaching 4 classes a semester and doing all the service activities that you do here at Westchester University. It's a very difficult thing to do. It's much easier when you're teaching, a course load of 2-2, and you're at an institution which has, large facilities and, machine shop that's, there are institutions that have a machine shop and they have a full-time machinist. And you want something built, you go down to the machine shop and they build it for you.
And somebody gets paid to write your grants for you.
And you have people who write your grants for you, and so on and so on. So absolutely.
Has the budget cut that has recently been there was a huge protest over that. I was part of that. And has that directly been an issue? I don't know if it's the whole reason. Obviously, it's a structural issue, but as the actual budget cuts that then the whole political issue with Governor Corbett and everything like that with these cuts been a direct influence on this strike union issue.
It's all called Stangl.
You mean from our point of view or from the state's point of view?
Kind of both. I'm kind of curious.
Is there a difference in the answers?
Yeah,
Yeah.
from the state's point of view, this is just a classic don't let a good crisis go to waste. It's just a 1-2 punch. Well, we'd like to offer you, we have to give you this offer because we don't know what the state of the budget's going to be. And we heard that frequently. But, and this goes to the woman in the back's question that I guess I misunderstood last time, or partially did at least. Yeah, there was a concerted effort by students, faculty, much stronger effort than other folks in the state system hierarchy to really put some public pressure and raise visibility on just how important restoring some of these funds would be. Pretty darn good job we did, 2 years in a row. Well, the state hasn't really changed their tune much. There's always going to be a different reason why, sorry, this is the contract proposal we have to give you. So, that's how it's coming from the state perspective. From us, yeah, it was triage. It was, okay, first of all, we got to restore funding. That's just has to happen first.